Hi everyone, this is my week 10 discussion post. So, any information from the weekly readings. So, the first thing that I found interesting was the article from the Harvard Business Review. And the researcher found that there was a positive relationship between teamwork and organizational performance. So, when teamwork increased, organizational performance also increased. And this was partially explained by employees' sense of commitment towards the organization. But on the other hand, they also found that more teamwork increased the level of work demands on employees, which made them feel a lot more anxious about their jobs. Employees experienced anxiety when they did not have enough time to complete their work. And the article also mentioned how a greater sense of commitment to the organization helped stem the experience of anxiety. So, for example, when an employee felt proud of working for their organization, they felt less stressed. And this is especially true when they shared the same values as the organization. The article was interesting because it highlighted the role that employers actually play in employee performance. So, when managers, for example, set realistic goals, when they recognize the employees' hard work, and they also allow for growth opportunities, the employees seem to be more committed to the job and they may experience increased job performance and even job satisfaction. And then lastly, the part about how employers should assess when teamwork is viable is what stood out the most to me because it's not always a great option, and the organization should assess when teamwork is beneficial. And I think that it should be very task oriented. So if the task requires teamwork, then it should be used. But if the task doesn't require it, then it shouldn't be used. But also to see if this is viable for the individual members, like the employees. Because obviously, in some instances, teamwork would be a better option, but in other times, like if team members don't work well together, then maybe it's not a good option. The second article that stood out to me was what does it take to be a virtual team player? The article highlighted the challenges associated with virtual teamwork, and they are different to the challenges that arise in traditional teams. So, therefore, they require different strategies to overcome this. However, the article also argues that personality traits required in virtual teams are not that different from face to face teams. One thing that stood out to me is how virtual team members need enhanced knowledge, skills, and abilities, especially around decision making, because they also need some analytical thinking. And it made me think about how virtual collaboration demands more independence, and it also requires more initiative from individual team members. And an interesting finding from the article was that in electronic collaboration, there's a higher degree of automatic process documentation. So, for example, email communications that can be stored and then accessed at a later time. And this was interesting because it argues that maybe trust is less important in virtual teams than in traditional teams. And it's not something that I considered before, but it kind of makes sense because obviously everything is documented, so there isn't really, I guess, there's more accountability, I would say. And then the cultural diversity and group cross-cultural team research article stood out to me because it highlighted the 4 cultural dimensions that could impact team interactions. And this includes power distance, uncertainty, avoidance, individualism, and masculinity. And it made me think about how these cultural values quietly influence everything. So, for example, who speaks up in meetings and even how decisions are made. And it reminded me that what's usually considered as effective teamwork can look different across different cultures. And particularly the part on cultural norms, that part really stood out to me because it highlighted that cultural norms play a huge part in teams. So when a group forms, there is cultural variation that could influence group activities. And lastly, it also highlighted that when team members have different backgrounds and they speak different languages, it's often the nonverbal expressions that play a huge role and how they often come from unspoken cultural expectations around the group, like status or group behavior or like a hierarchy. And this makes cultural competence just as important as the communication, I would say. And then number 2, what qualities do you think are needed for a person to be considered a team player? I would say communication skills, because this means that team members are listening actively and they are able to express their ideas more clearly. And it also kind of it forces the person to ask clarifying questions as well. So there's more of that engagement. And then that, of course, leads to more shared information, obviously within a respectful manner. And then I think another one would be accountability and reliability. So here, for example, meeting deadlines, actually following through, and also just taking ownership of individual mistakes. And then the other thing that I found really most important was emotional intelligence, because it makes people manage their emotions in a constructive manner, and it also allows for people to read others' emotions more accurately. And I think that this helps when resolving conflict in a more calm manner, and also allows for some empathy. And then this also ties in, of course, with having respect for each other when having diverse opinions, since everybody has a different background with different thoughts and opinions. And then number 3, in your own words, what is the difference between a work group and a work team? What have your experiences when a team is really a group and vice versa? Okay, so for a work group, I would say that is more individualistic, and group members are more independent. So kind of coordination and interaction is kind of minimal, and the accountability really just falls on the individual members. So the roles within those groups are kind of more loosely defined, I would say. But with a work team, I think it's a lot more shared, it's a lot more collaborative, and team members are able to work interdependently. And this obviously requires a very high level of collaboration. And accountability is not just about individuals, it is about the entire team. And the roles are often very clearly defined compared to a work group. And then in my experience, I think I've experienced both work groups and work teams. For work groups, I would say this is definitely at a school level, like class projects and things like that. So even though sometimes we would be called a team in class, we all kind of had separate projects and we didn't really need to do as much collaboration. I would say that this was more so in like the earlier years of undergrad, because the questions or the task really was more, it was made up of smaller sections that we all just took, and we kind of just did our own and then came together and brought it all together, kind of a thing. So yeah. And then with a team, I would say I've experienced that way more in my place of work, because everybody's tasks were kind of interwoven with each other. We were forced to, obviously in a good way, work together, and we always kind of supported each other and updated each other. And although we kind of had our separate tasks, we still needed each other's tasks to form the bigger task at hand, and we always needed to check in with each other. And I think it just felt more rewarding, and it really made an impact on the task that we were doing. And we were able to celebrate our wins as a team. And I think that we really learned how to depend on each other. Of course, holding each other accountable, but depending on each other in a way that matters, I would say. So, yeah, thank you.